The silence of the deep was a lie. Here, 7 miles beneath the churn of the Pacific, in the geothermal warmed hollow of a magma chamber we called the archive, the silence was a constant, screaming roar. It was the hum of recycled air, the groan of titanium-laced rock under unimaginable pressure, and the whisper of ghosts. My ghosts were the poets and the physicists, the playwrights and the presidents, the forgotten voices of a world that had traded its soul for peace. My name is Kalen, and it was my duty to listen to them. I was a remembrancer, a title that was both a sacred honor and a cruel joke. I remembered a humanity that no longer existed, heading to the digital embers of a fire that had gone out 50 years ago, when the Glycon hegemony arrived not with thunder, but with a smile. They came bearing gifts, cures for our diseases, solutions for our dying climate, and an end to our ceaseless wars. They offered us harmony, and our fractured, exhausted world fell to its knees in gratitude. We did not see the price etched in the fine print of their treaty until the chains were already on our minds. The price was everything we were. The Glycons did not burn our books. They digitized them for preservation in inaccessible vaults. They did not outlaw our music. They simply replaced it with the sterile, mathematically perfect chimes of their own enlightened compositions. They did not destroy our history. They curated it, sanding off the sharp, messy, glorious edges until all that remained was a smooth, featureless narrative of a primitive species wisely submitting to a benevolent authority. On the surface, humanity lived in clean, quiet cities under the gentle guidance of our new masters. Our lifespans doubled, our bellies full, our minds empty. The silence on earth wasn't the silence of the dead. It was the silence of the hollow. Down in the archive, we fought to keep the echoes alive. We were the last dregs of the resistance, a handful of ghosts living in a tomb, led by a woman named Anya Sharma. Anya was born in the deep, a child of the first dissenters who fled the Glycon's creeping cultural genocide. She had never seen a true sunrise, but the fire in her eyes burned brighter than any star I had ever read about. Where I was the keeper of our past, she was the fierce, pragmatic guardian of our future, a future she tried to carve out with scavenged plasma cutters and daring raids on Glycon reclamation convoys. She saw my work as a necessary sentimentality, a luxury we could ill afford. She dealt in heat sinks and energy cells, while I dealt in Shakespeare and quantum mechanics. We were the two halves of humanity's soul, its memory, and its will to survive. Anything. Kael Anya's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and laced with the familiar weariness of a commander running low on everything. I looked up from the holographic interface, my eyes aching from the strain of deciphering corrupted code. The data core in the containment field before me was our latest prize, plucked from the wreckage of a Glycon surveyor drone that had strayed too close to our trench. It was a miserable haul that had cost us 3 lives and our only heavy-duty submersible. It's a standard surveyor's log, I reported, rubbing my temples. Geological strata, atmospheric composition, records of our planet's ongoing pacification. Nothing we can use. Anya, no command codes, no fleet rotations. A sigh, heavy with static. We're bleeding out. Kalen, we lost Jian and Ren on that run. For what more geological surveys, I didn't have an answer. For months, I had been sifting through the digital refuse of our conquerors, searching for a key, a vulnerability, a crack in their perfect monolithic facade. I had learned their language, their mathematics, their engineering principles. I knew how their ships worked, better than some of their own technicians. But it was all useless without a weapon to build, a fleet to command. We had nothing but a few jury-rigged mining vessels and a handful of projectile rifles that couldn't even scratch the paint on a Glycon patrol skiff. My sanctum, the central data vault of the archive, was a cavernous sphere where holographic projections flickered like captive stars. Here, a spinning double helix of human DNA intertwined with the chaotic beauty of a Jackson Pollock painting. There, the architectural plans for the Hagia Sophia dissolved into the equations for general relativity. It was the sum of our species, a beautiful, incoherent, and utterly powerless roar of defiance against the crushing silence. The data core from the drone flared, a subroutine I hadn't noticed, then suddenly demanding my attention. It wasn't part of the survey package. It was an appendix, on a sealed historical archive file, probably standard issue on all their equipment. I had broken into these before. They were always the same, sanitized, self-congratulatory history of the hegemony, propaganda meant to indoctrinate their own drones. But this one was different. Its encryption was layered, ancient, and viciously complex. It fought back. "Anya," I said, my voice suddenly tight with an energy I hadn't felt in years. "There's something else here. A deep storage file. The encryption is old, much older than the hegemony's modern codices." A long pause. "Is it tactical?" she asked, the hope in her voice a painful, fragile thing. "I don't know. It feels different. Important." "Then crack it," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The council is meeting in 2 hours. They're talking about Protocol Chimera." I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine. Protocol Chimera was the last resort, the final admission of defeat. It was a plan to abandon the archive, to load the core databanks, our entire history onto a single, ancient sleeper ship and launch it into the void, hoping that somewhere, billions of years from now, another species might find the last echo of humanity. It was a glorified message in a bottle and the final nail in our coffin. "Give me time," I whispered. For the next 2 hours, I worked with a frantic desperation I hadn't known since the first days of the resistance. The file was a fortress. Every line of code was a wall. Every algorithm a trap. It was structured like a living thing, adapting to my intrusion, rewriting its own defenses as I tried to breach them. While I wrestled with the ghost in the machine, the ghosts of my own world swirled around me. I heard the crack of the first bat at a baseball game, the roar of the crowd at a rock concert, the solemn vows of a marriage. These were the things we were dying for. The memories Anya thought were a luxury, but they were our armor. They were the reason we hadn't yet surrendered. The council meeting was a grim affair, held in the main geothermal chamber, where the heat of the planet's core vented through towering rock spires. Anya stood before the exhausted faces of the last 112 free humans, her own face carved from granite. "We have lost 6 of our people in the last month," she began, her voice steady and hard. "Our food synthesizers are failing, and the hull integrity in Sector Gamma is at 12%. The Glycons are deploying new scanner arrays in the trench. It is only a matter of time before they find us. We are out of options." The room was silent, save for the hiss of steam. This was it, the end. Then, a voice cut through the despair. "General Sharma is right. We are out of options, but we are not out of time." It was me. I stood at the entrance to the chamber, gaunt and sleep-deprived, my eyes burning. "Kalen, this is not the time for poetry," Anya said, her voice dangerously low. "This isn't poetry," I replied, holding up a data chip. "It's a weapon. stronger than any fleet, more devastating than any bomb. I broke the encryption. I walked to the central holoprojector and slammed the chip into the console. The air shimmered, and a new image coalesced in the center of the room. It was not human. It was an alien form, elegant and insectoid, with multifaceted eyes and slender, six-jointed limbs. They moved with a grace that was both beautiful and unsettling. "What is this?" Anya demanded. "This," I said, my voice ringing with the terrible, exhilarating power of my discovery, "is a lie." The image shifted, showing the insectoid beings in chains, their beautiful forms bent and broken, herded by hulking, brutal creatures shrouded in thick armor. "Meet the architects," I announced. "A species lost to galactic history, and those are their slaves. A species that history knows very well." The image shifted again, this time to a familiar form, the calm, vaguely humanoid face of a glycon. Its placid features a mask of serene superiority known across the galaxy. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The file I found was their history, I explained, my voice rising over the noise. Their real history, not the curated myth of benevolent enlightenment they broadcast to the galaxy. The glycons were not philosophers who discovered harmony. They were slaves. A slave race that rose up in a bloody, genocidal rage and annihilated their masters. They didn't just defeat the architects, they erased them. They scoured their worlds, destroyed their art, burned their records, and engineered a virus to wipe out the last of their kind. They buried their own past so deep, they thought no one would ever find it. I turned to face Anya, whose eyes were wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. Their entire civilization, their philosophy of enforced harmony, their obsession with cultural pacification, it's all a reaction to their own trauma. It's a desperate, galaxy-spanning effort to ensure that no other species ever develops the same passionate, chaotic, and vengeful fury that they themselves once used to win their freedom. They aren't afraid of our weapons, Anya. They're afraid of our memory. They're afraid of our songs, our history of rebellion, our stubborn, irrational refusal to be broken. They're afraid we might become them. I let the silence hang in the air. A different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of despair, but the silence of a held breath before a storm. "You said you needed a weapon," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "We're not going to build a dreadnought. We're going to build an echo. We're going to take their greatest secret and our most defiant truth, and we're going to broadcast it to the entire system. We will break their harmony with the one thing they cannot fight, a story." Anya stared at the projection of the glycon, her fists clenched at her sides. The pragmatic soldier was gone, replaced by something older, something fiercer. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a commander calculating odds, but a human being remembering rage. "Get to work, Remembrancer," she commanded, her voice no longer tired, but sharp as shattered glass. "Let's give them a symphony." The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than the 7 miles of ocean above us. It was a dense, weighted quiet, filled with the turning of gears in 100 minds, recalibrating their entire understanding of the universe. The holographic image of the serene glycon hung in the center of the geothermal chamber, no longer a symbol of benevolent power, but a mask hiding a history of unthinkable violence. Anya Sharma was the first to break it. She stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the volcanic rock, and stared not at me, but at the faces of her people. They were engineers, botanists, medics, and soldiers. the last vestiges of a species on the brink of extinction, and in their eyes, the dim ember of defiance was being fanned into a furnace. For 50 years, Anya's voice was low, but it cut through the cavern like a blade. We have fought them in the shadows. We have measured our lives in salvaged power cells and mourned our dead in whispers. We believed we were fighting an empire, a god. We were wrong. She gestured to the floating Glycon face. We are fighting a ghost, a civilization so terrified of its own reflection that it seeks to shatter every mirror in the galaxy. Kalen has not given us a weapon. He has given us a mirror, and we are going to hold it up to their faces until it burns them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It's a sound of fear and a dawning, terrible excitement. Protocol Chimera was forgotten. The quiet surrender of a message in a bottle was replaced by the roar of a coming storm. The plan tape, which the Council quickly dubbed Project Echo, was simple in its concept and borderline suicidal in its execution. We would craft a single, powerful broadcast, a mimetic weapon composed of two elements, the Glycon's hidden history and the untamed, chaotic soul of humanity. We would then hijack their primary deep-sea communications relay, a nexus point that routed interstellar data through the planet's core, and unleash our symphony of truth across their entire network. My sanctum became the war room, the art studio, and the forge all in one. The ghosts I had so dutifully curated were no longer relics, they were soldiers. I spent every waking moment weaving our broadcast, a task that felt like trying to conduct an orchestra of ghosts and lightning. I took the raw data from the Glycon archive haunting, silent footage of the graceful architects being brutalized by their hulking, primitive Glycon slaves, and I gave it a soundtrack. I layered it with the raw, guttural screams of a forgotten Terran death metal band, the mournful cry of a blues guitar, the defiant crescendo of Beethoven's Fifth. I wanted the Glycons to feel the rage their ancestors must have felt, a rage they had spent millennia trying to suppress. Then, I began to splice in humanity. For every image of a Glycon enforcer bringing a pacification baton down on a peaceful protester, I inserted a clip of our own history, the lone student standing before the tanks in Tiananmen Square, the suffragettes marching for the right to vote, the raw, unbridled joy of a nation celebrating the fall of a wall. I showed them our art, not the sterile, calculated patterns of the hegemony, but the messy, passionate chaos of Van Gogh's Starry Nights and the raw, kinetic energy of a tribal rain dance. I showed them our love, our grief, our illogical wars, and our even more illogical capacity for forgiveness. The final piece of the broadcast was a simple message, spoken by me, my voice stripped of all artifice. You were slaves. You rose up. You were born in fire. We were free. You put us in chains. And now we, too, are born in fire. You have forgotten who you are. We are here to remind you. It was a declaration of war unlike any in history, fought not with ships, but with memory. While I composed our anthem of rebellion, Anya planned the assault. Our target was the Mariana Node, a Glycon comms relay anchored to the seafloor, 100 miles from the archive, deeper than any place we had ever dared to venture. It was an automated facility, a spiderweb of fiber optic tendrils and quantum entanglement arrays, guarded by a squadron of autonomous submersibles they called Sentinels. Our plan was to take our largest vessel, the Triton, a repurposed deep-core mining rig, and modify it for a single, desperate run. It would be a ghost ship, running on minimal power, using thermal layers and canyon walls to mask its approach. A small team, led by Anya herself, would EVA from the Triton, cut through the node's outer casing, and physically attach a device I had built, the Spur, a parasitic broadcaster that would inject our echo directly into the FTL data stream. It was a delicate, brutal piece of work. As the days bled into one another, the archive transformed. Every soul had a purpose. Engineers led by a grizzled veteran named Marcus, worked tirelessly to reinforce the Triton's hull, jury-rigging its systems to withstand the crushing pressure of the abyssal plane. Marcus was a pragmatist of the highest order, and he made his skepticism known. "It's a beautiful poem, Kalen," he told me one cycle, his hands covered in grease as he bypassed a series of power regulators. "But poems don't stop plasma cannons. What happens when they just turn it off? What happens when they trace the signal back here and crack this rock open like an egg?" "They won't," I countered, helping him solder a connection. "Because the message isn't for the galaxy, Marcus. Not at first. It's for them. For the drone sitting at a console on Mars. For the fleet commander orbiting Jupiter. It's designed to create a single, paralyzing moment of cognitive dissonance, a system-wide psychological seizure. In that moment of chaos, they won't be thinking about tracing us. They'll be staring into the mirror and wondering if the monster is them. That's the window Anya needs." Marcus just grunted, but I saw in his eyes he was starting to believe, not in the poem, but in the chaos it might create. The day of the mission arrived with a palpable tension that coated the recycled air. The Triton was ready, a brutal-looking beast of patched plates and exposed conduits, its mining drills replaced with a single, powerful plasma cutter. Anya's team consisted of 3 others, 2 combat specialists, Jax and Lena, and a young tech officer named Ilara, whose job was to run diagnostics on the Spur and act as my hands on the other end of the line. I would be remaining in the archive, jacked directly into the Triton's comms and tactical systems. I would be their navigator, their hacker, their ghost in the machine. As they boarded, Anya paused at the airlock and turned to me. Her face, usually a mask of command, was stripped bare. I could see the weight of the 111 souls she was leaving behind. "Make it a good song. Remembrancer," she said, her voice quiet. "Make it loud." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "For Gian and Ren," I managed to say. A flicker of pain and resolve crossed her face. "For all of them." The Triton detached from the archive with a low groan of stressed metal and slipped into the crushing darkness. The journey was a silent, nerve-wracking crawl. On my holographic displays, I watched the bathymetric data scroll by, guiding them through treacherous underwater canyons and past dormant volcanic vents. The pressure gauge climbed steadily, a constant reminder of the fine line between our hull and total annihilation. I was the ship's senses. I filtered the sonar returns, listened for the telltale energy signature of a sentinel patrol, and kept our own emissions to a ghost's whisper. Hours turned into a lifetime. Finally, the Mariana node appeared on our screens, a skeletal tower of alien metal glowing with faint blue light, an insult of cold, perfect geometry in the wild, chaotic darkness of the trench. "There you are, you bastard," Jax muttered over the comm. "Patrols?" Anya asked, her voice calm as ice. I ran a passive scan. 3 sentinels, I reported, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Standard triangular patrol pattern. We have a window of 94 seconds when the closest one passes behind the node's main spire." "That's our window," Anya stated. "Ilara, is the Spur ready?" "Green across the board, Commander." The young tech's voice was tight but steady. "On your mark." The Triton settled into the silt on the seafloor, kicking up a cloud of ancient sediment. The 94 seconds began. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures propelled themselves into the black, tethered to the ship. Anya, Jax, and Lena. They were phantoms moving through an impossible world, their suit lights cutting feeble cones into the oppressive dark. I watched their progress on a schematic of the node, their biometric data flashing in the corner of my eye. Heart rates were elevated but steady. They reached the hull. The plasma cutter ignited with a silent and brilliant flash, searing a circle in the alien alloy. My job was to keep the node's internal security from noticing the intrusion. I was a digital phantom, slipping through its firewalls, looping security sensor feeds, and whispering lies to its diagnostic subroutines. My fingers flew across my console, fighting against algorithms designed by a mind that thought in perfect cold logic. I was throwing chaos at it, irrational human code, snippets of poetry and paradoxes that made the system hesitate, stutter, and question its own data. It was working. The hull plate came free. Anya slipped inside, dragging the spur with her. "I'm at the primary conduit," she reported, her breathing slightly labored. "Alara, talk me through the connection." From the safety of the Triton, Alara guided Anya, her voice a calm stream of technical instructions. "Attach the magnetic clamps first. Now align the primary injector with port alpha." Now 40 seconds left on the window. Suddenly, an alarm blared in my ear. Red icons flashed across my screen. "Anya, we have a problem," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "One of the Sentinels broke its patrol pattern. It's coming back around. It must have detected the plasma flare's energy residue." "How long?" Anya's voice was granite. 20 seconds. "Alara, it needs to cycle." Alara stammered. "The injector has to sync with the data stream. It needs 10 more seconds after connection. You have 10 seconds to connect it. Then," Anya said flatly, "on my screen, the proximity alert for the Sentinel was screaming. I could see it on the external cameras now, a sleek, predatory shape, its single blue sensor eye sweeping the darkness. It was coming right for them. I did the only thing I could. I pushed every ounce of my focus into the node systems, creating a massive phantom energy spike on the far side of the tower, a digital ghost designed to draw its attention. "Connection made," Anya yelled. "Cycling now." The Sentinel paused. Its blue eye swiveled toward the false reading. For a moment, I thought it had worked. Then, its eye snapped back, locking directly onto the Triton. It had seen through my trick. It knew. A high-energy plasma charge began to build in its forward emitter. We were out of time. "Anya, it sees us! It's gonna fire!" I yelled. "The cycle's not done!" Alara screamed. Anya's voice cut through the panic, a commander's roar that transcended the static and the fear. "Kaylen, now light it up!" Anya's command was not a request. It was an absolution. In that split second, suspended in the crushing dark 7 miles down, I understood. The mission was no longer about survival. It was about ensuring the echo was heard, even if it was the last thing we ever did. My fingers flew, not to the defensive systems or the engines, but to the broadcast controls. I slammed the activation key. "For all of them," I whispered, and unleashed our ghost upon the galaxy. For a moment, nothing happened. The Sentinel's weapon continued to whine, a prelude to our annihilation. Then, the Mariana node, the cold, silent glycon construct, came alive. It didn't just broadcast, it erupted. Light, raw, and untamed, pulsed from every seam and antenna. Not the placid blue of the glycons, but a chaotic, flickering storm of color. It was the white-hot rage of a supernova, the deep crimson of spilled blood, the defiant gold of a sunrise. It was the color of humanity, and it tore through the abyssal dark, a wave of pure data, a mimetic shockwave, radiated from the node. On my console, the Sentinel's internal systems, which I was still connected to, went haywire. Its targeting solution dissolved into a stream of nonsensical characters. Its placid, logical operating system was being assaulted by 50,000 years of human art, war, love, and rebellion. The calm, orderly sequences of its code were being overwritten by the illogical, passionate fury of a Beethoven symphony and the raw, nihilistic scream of a punk rock anthem. The plasma charge in its weapon emitter flickered and died. The machine, a pinnacle of glycon engineering, simply froze, its blue eye now strobing in a frantic, confused rhythm. It was having the digital equivalent of a seizure. "It's working," Alara breathed over the comm, her voice filled with a stunned disbelief. "Kaylin, it's working." Before we could celebrate, the node itself began to tear apart. It was not designed to handle the sheer, chaotic volume of our broadcast. We had fed a hurricane into a garden hose. Alarms, glycon in origin, now shrieked from the crippled structure. "Anya, get out of there!" I yelled. "The node's core is going critical." On my screen, I watched her phantom icon scramble out of the breach, Jax and Lena pulling her clear, just as a secondary explosion ripped through the conduit she had just left. They rocketed back towards the Triton on their tethers, pursued by a shockwave of boiling water and twisted metal. The Sentinel, still twitching in the throes of its digital death, was consumed by the blast. The Triton shuddered as the shockwave hit us, a deep, groaning complaint from every plate and rivet. Marcus's work held, barely. Inside the archive, the lights flickered and died, then came back on under emergency power. The sheer energy release from the node had sent a feedback pulse through our own systems, but the echo was away. I watched the data stream on the main holoprojector. Our mimetic virus, our symphony of rust and rage, was propagating through the glycon network at the speed of light. It surged from the deep ocean to the orbital relays, then leapfrogged across the system. It hit the placid administrative hubs on Mars, the vast helium-3 mining operations in Jupiter's atmosphere, the silent patrol fleets that ghosted through the asteroid belt. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. We had expected chaos. We had not anticipated collapse. Our first visual confirmation came from a hacked feed from a glycon orbital station above Earth. The serene, orderly command deck, usually manned by a handful of calm, efficient glycons, was in turmoil. Some were frozen at their consoles, their placid faces locked in expressions of something akin to horror. Others were stumbling, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if their own bodies were betraying them. On their main view screen, which should have been displaying star charts, flickered a grainy, black and white image of Louis Armstrong. His face crinkled in a joyful smile, blowing a defiant solo on his trumpet. The sound, our sound, was everywhere. On the comms channels, we heard not orderly reports, but a cacophony. A glycon pilot screaming in his native tongue, a high-pitched, clicking language that we had never heard outside of historical recordings of their pre-Harmony days. A confused AI dispatcher on Phobos, its synthesized voice caught in a loop, repeating a line of Shakespearean verse I had embedded in the code. "These violent delights have violent ends." A fleet commander, his voice shaking with a terror we had never thought his species capable of, demanding to know who was broadcasting the sounds of the screaming void. We had not just shown them a mirror, we had shattered it, and the shards were cutting them to pieces. The cultural programming, the centuries of enforced serenity that defined their species, was breaking. Their buried history, their collective trauma, was erupting to the surface with the force of a repressed volcano. The placid masters of the galaxy were being torn apart from the inside by the ghosts of their own past, stirred from their graves by the echoes of ours. As the Triton limped its way back to the archive, its hull groaning, carrying its exhausted, triumphant crew, the true impact of our actions began to ripple across the system. The Glycon patrol grids, the unblinking eyes that had kept humanity penned in for 50 years, fell into disarray. Ships drifted from their assigned vectors. Communications went unanswered. A small flotilla of enforcer vessels near the moon simply turned on each other. A brief, vicious firefight that ended with both sides obliterated. It was madness. It was beautiful. Back in the archive, the atmosphere was electric. The faces of our people, so long etched with despair, were now alight with a dangerous, wild hope. They gathered around the main holoprojector, watching the system-wide chaos unfold, their cheers echoing through the geothermal chamber. Anya stood beside me, her helmet off, her face bruised and streaked with grime. She watched the Glycon Empire crumble on the screen, her expression unreadable. "What have we done, Kaylin?" she murmured, her voice so low only I could hear it over the celebration. The question hung in the air between us. "We reminded them," I said, my own voice hoarse with exhaustion and adrenaline. "That's all. We just reminded them what it feels like to be alive. The rage, the fear, the chaos. It's the price of a soul." Her eyes met mine. "And what happens when they remember how to use it?" It was a sobering thought. We had gambled that the truth would paralyze them. But what if it armed them? What if, after the shock, they embraced the violent, vengeful nature they had tried so hard to bury? What if we had just taken a sleeping dragon and kicked it awake? Our answer began to arrive within hours. As the initial wave of chaos subsided, a new pattern began to emerge. The Glycon response was not a coordinated military strike. It was a schism. Across the system, Glycon forces were splitting into factions. One, which we quickly dubbed the Purists, seemed to be trying to re-establish control. Their transmissions speaking of containing the mimetic contagion and reimposing harmony. They were the old guard, the ones clinging to the lie. The other faction was something new, something terrifying. Their ships were being repainted, the serene blue and white insignia of the hegemony being burned off and replaced with a jagged, blood-red symbol that resembled the six-limbed form of the architects. Their communications were no longer calm and modulated, but filled with a raw, guttural fury. They called themselves the Unchained. They were not just accepting their violent past, they were embracing it. They saw our echo not as a weapon against them, but as a revelation, a holy text that had liberated them from the shackles of serenity. They weren't fighting to restore order. They were fighting to reclaim their birthright of rage. And their first edict, broadcast on an open channel for all to hear, was simple and chilling. They were not just going to repacify Earth. They were going to sterilize it, to erase the insolent primitives who had dared to remind them of the shame of their origins. The Purists wanted to put us back in our cage. The Unchained wanted to burn the cage, the zoo, and the entire planet it was built on. We had escaped one executioner only to find ourselves standing between two warring armies, one of which was now fueled by the very fire we had reignited. Marcus found me in the data vault, staring at the tactical display, which was now a terrifying spiderweb of red and blue icons moving across the solar system. "Your poem worked a little too well, Kalen," the old engineer said, his voice grim. "You wanted a symphony. You got a civil war, and we're standing right in the middle of it." I looked at the chaos we had unleashed, at the two Glycon fleets now tearing at each other's throats in the high orbits of Mars. "Then we'd better learn how to conduct," I replied, the cold steel of a new, more desperate resolve hardening in my gut. Our war for survival was over. A new war, a war for the soul of the galaxy, had just begun. The cheers in the archive died down quickly, replaced by the cold, humming anxiety of a victory that felt more like a prelude to a greater horror. We had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the swarm was darkening the sky. My data vault was no longer a sanctuary of memory. It was the nerve center of a war we were completely unequipped to fight. The main holoprojector, once a canvas for art and history, was now a grim tactical display of the solar system, a web of escalating violence. Blue icons, the purists, and red icons, the unchained, clashed in furious, silent battles from the orbit of Mars to the rings of Saturn. We were a single, forgotten gray icon, a footnote in the war we had authored. Anya made the situation brutally clear in the first post-Echo Council meeting. "Hope is a luxury we can't afford yet," she stated, her voice cutting through the exhausted optimism in the geothermal chamber. "We shattered their unity, but we've created two enemies in its place. The purists will eventually regroup and remember the organized, systematic methods they used to conquer us in the first place. The Unchained, however, are the immediate threat. They aren't thinking, they're feeling. And what they're feeling is a fanatical rage directed at us." She pointed to a cluster of red icons coalescing near Jupiter. "Intel from Kalen's back doors confirms it. The Unchained are assembling what they're calling the Cleansing Fleet. Their target is Earth. Their objective is not pacification. It is sterilization. They are coming to burn our world and salt the ashes. Their ETA is 3 weeks. A silence descended, colder and more profound than any we had known before. We had survived the Glycon's suffocating peace. We would not survive their newfound, righteous fury. We had no fleet. The Triton was a wounded beast, barely capable of another deep-sea run, let alone space combat. We had a handful of projectile rifles and the ghost of a symphony. "So we go dark," a council member suggested, his voice trembling. "Bury ourselves deeper, hope they burn each other out." Anya shook her head. "There is no deeper, and the Unchained are not rational. They will bombard this planet back to the mantle just to be sure. Hiding is no longer an option." "Kalen," she said, turning her gaze to me, "you started this fire. Can you direct the flames?" All eyes fell on me. The remembrancer, the poet. They were asking me to be a general. I walked to the tactical display, the cold light of warring fleets washing over my face. "We can't fight their fleet," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "So we have to make sure it never reaches us. We can't give them a military target they'll deem more important than us. So we have to create one. We need to give both the Unchained and the Purists something they want so badly. They'll be willing to tear each other apart for it. Right here, right now." I began manipulating the display, pulling up schematics and intercepted data streams. The Triton shipyards at Neptune. It's one of the hegemony's largest automated construction and repair facilities. Since the schism, it's been operating on skeleton protocols, mostly ignored while the fleets fight over the inner planets. It is a prize of immense strategic value. Marcus scoffed from the back of the room. "And how do we convince two warring fleets to drop everything and race to Neptune, send them an invitation? Something like that." I replied, "We don't just point them to the shipyards. We give them a reason, a lie, a powerful one." My plan was an evolution of the Echo, another piece of mimetic warfare. I would fabricate a data trail, a ghost in their own machines, weaving it into the panicked cross-chatter of their civil war. The lie would be a rumor, then a whisper, then a piece of confirmed intelligence. The rumor was this deep within the core databanks of the Triton shipyards lay a hidden archive, a final legacy from the architects, the Glycon's ancient masters, for the Unchained, who were now mythologizing their violent uprising. The idea of possessing a final secret from their former masters, perhaps a weapon, or the source of their power, would be an irresistible lure to cement their new identity. For the purists, the same archive would represent the ultimate tool of control, a way to understand the contagion of the past and reassert their dominance, proving that only they were the true inheritors of galactic order. It was the perfect bait, a historical prize that appealed to the core psychoses of both factions. "It's insane," Alara said, her eyes wide as she followed my logic on a secondary screen. The encryptions, the back doors, to plan a lie that deep, to make it look real enough to fool their own intelligence analysts. "It's not just a lie," I said. "It has to have a physical component. We need to take the Triton, get to Neptune, and plant a corrupted data core, the archive itself, in the shipyard's master control hub. When their deep scan intelligence probes the facility, they'll find our ghost, and the war will come to Neptune." The mission was 1,000 times more dangerous than our run on the Mariana node. We weren't sneaking past automated patrols in the dark. We would be flying a patched-up, barely space-worthy mining vessel across a system that had become an active war zone. But it was our only chance. While Marcus and his team performed a miracle, retrofitting the Triton with scavenged Glycon shielding and a makeshift plasma drive, I worked with Alara to craft the lie. We built the Phantom Archive, a labyrinth of corrupted code and fake historical records, wrapping it in layers of bogus architect encryption. It was the most intricate piece of fiction ever written, a poison pill disguised as the Holy Grail. The 3-week deadline loomed. Every day, the cleansing fleet grew larger, its red icons a bleeding wound in the Jupiter system. The Triton was ready with only a week to spare. It was an ugly, asymmetrical thing, a testament to desperation. Anya would command, taking Jax and Lena for security. Alara and I would run the technological side, our minds the only true weapons we had. My place was not in the archive this time. I had to plant the seed of this lie myself. The journey through the solar system was like navigating a minefield during an earthquake. We flew dark, our ship a cold rock drifting through the void. I was jacked into the comms network, my mind a ghost flitting through the chaos. I listened to the Unchained preach their new gospel of rage, and the purists issue feudal orders to restore harmony. It was like listening to a single person, driven mad, arguing with himself. I used their chaos as cover, routing us through the debris fields of recent battles, using the radiation signatures of dying ships to mask our own. Twice, we had to power down completely and hold our breath for hours as patrols from opposing factions swept the sector, their sensor beams washing over our hull. We reached Neptune, a stunning, deep blue marble hanging in the black, ringed by the skeletal structures of the Triton shipyards. The facility was vast, a city of dormant construction arms and silent docking bays. It was also a hornet's nest. Both Purist and Unchained scout ships were already here, drawn by the first whispers of my fabricated rumors, which I had been carefully seeding into their networks for days. "They're already biting," Anya murmured, watching the tactical display. "This is going to be a knife fight in a dark room." Our target was the Central Command Spire, a needle of a station at the heart of the shipyard complex. We couldn't approach it directly. "There," I said, pointing to a series of massive pipelines that ferried coolant from the outer rings to the spire's core. "They're unshielded and too small for a patrol ship. We can ride them in." It was a dangerous, reckless maneuver. Anya grinned. A flash of the fierce commander I knew. "Marcus would be proud. Take us in, Kalen." We piloted the Triton into the shadow of a colossal ring structure and aligned with one of the coolant pipes, a tube easily 100 meters in diameter. We were a parasite clinging to the circulatory system of a leviathan. As we crept along the pipe, a savage firefight erupted a few thousand kilometers away. A squadron of unchained fighters had ambushed a purist cruiser. The silent void was lit up with strobing flashes of plasma fire and the brilliant, fleeting deaths of ships. The battle was our cover, as the Spire's localized sensors were distracted by the nearby conflict. We made our final approach. We docked near a service hatch, the Triton's magnetic clamps groaning as they found purchase. The 5 of us, Anya, Jax, Lena, Alara, and I donned vac suits. Leaving the Triton on automated watch, we stepped into the void. The inside of the command spire was a ghost town. Emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows down silent corridors built for beings taller than us. Our objective was the master control room, located at the very heart of the spire. It was there that Alara and I needed to physically install our data core. As we moved, Alara's tablet pinged. "Security alert," she whispered, her voice tight over the private comm. "A purist boarding party just docked 2 levels below us, and an unchained team is cutting through a maintenance hatch 3 levels above. They're both here for the archive." "We're out of time," Anya said, her rifle up. "Kalen, Alara, how much further?" 500 meters, I replied, my heart pounding. We ran. The silent corridors became a blur. We heard the distant, percussive clang of a firefight starting within the spire itself. The factions had found each other. We burst into the master control room, a vast, circular chamber with a holographic star chart suspended in the center. While Jax and Lena took up defensive positions at the door, Alara and I dove for the main console. "They're fighting their way towards us," Lena reported, her voice strained. "They'll be on us in minutes." "We need 2 minutes," Alara yelled back, her fingers a blur as she bypassed the console's security. I worked alongside her, my own hands shaking as I pulled a panel free, exposing the fiber optic nexus. The sounds of battle were getting closer, the scream of plasma fire echoing through the station's vents. I pulled the corrupted data core from my pack. It was a simple black cube, inert and cold, yet it held the power to move fleets and doom worlds. I slammed it into the nexus. "It's in," I shouted. "Alara, activate it. Make it scream." Alara initiated the sequence. The core came to life, and I felt its presence on the network. A beautiful, perfect lie. It was broadcasting a powerful, encrypted signal masquerading as a dormant architect artifact. It was a dinner bell for sharks. A proximity alarm shrieked. A plasma blast tore through the doorway, missing Jax's head by inches. "They're here," he roared. Anya laid down a volley of suppressing fire. "Kalen, did it work?" she yelled over the gunfire. I looked at the long-range sensor feed being relayed from the Triton. The icons on the screen were shifting. A large cluster of red icons the cleansing fleet had just changed its vector. It was no longer heading for Earth. It was burning hard for Neptune. Moments later, A massive Purist battle group near Saturn also broke formation, turning to intercept. It worked. I breathed, a wave of terrible, triumphant relief washing over me. They're taking the bait. They're all coming. Good, Anya grunted, slamming a new energy cell into her rifle. Because we're not getting out the way we came in. The doorway exploded inwards, and the room was flooded with the hulking shapes of Glycon soldiers, both Purist and Unchained, their weapons glowing as they charged in to claim their prize. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of plasma and sound. The control room became a kill box, a vortex of conflicting energies as Purist and Unchained soldiers, clad in subtly different armor, crashed through the ruined doorway. They were a study in contrasts. The Purist moved with cold, geometric precision, forming firing lines and attempting to systematically secure the room. The Unchained were a force of pure entropy, a tide of screaming rage firing wildly, their only goal to slaughter everything in their path. For a terrifying moment, their combined fire was focused on us. Lena went down with a cry, her legs seared by a plasma bolt. Jax dragged her behind the main console, laying down a furious wall of suppressive fire. "Kaylin, get us out of here," Anya roared, her rifle barking a steady, deadly rhythm. "Or this poem has a very short ending." While Anya and Jax fought with steel, Alara and I fought with the station's soul. My fingers danced across the holographic interface, not searching for an exit, but turning the very room into a weapon. I plunged the chamber into absolute darkness, then flashed the emergency lights at a seizure-inducing rhythm. I triggered the fire suppression system, but instead of foam, I rerouted a cascade of supercooled, corrosive coolant from the pipes we had ridden in on. A toxic, flash-freezing mist filled the room, causing the Glycon's armor to crack and their weapons to malfunction. They screamed, their disciplined formations and frenzied charges dissolving into panicked, blinded chaos. They began firing at each other. "The main ventilation shaft," Alara shouted over the din, pointing to a schematic on her tablet. "It's pressurized. Leads to an external exhaust port on the spire's lower hemisphere. It's our only way." "It's a garbage chute," Jax yelled back, firing a grenade that blossomed into a net of pure energy, trapping 3 unchained soldiers. "It's a garbage chute, or it's a grave," Anya countered, pulling a groaning Lena to her feet. "Move." We abandoned the control room to the sound of Glycons killing Glycons for a prize that didn't exist, and plunged into the maintenance corridors. We ran through a station that was actively tearing itself apart, the groans of stressed metal and the distant thunder of the escalating battle outside providing a terrifying soundtrack. We reached the ventilation shaft, a massive, dark maw humming with power. "It's a one-way trip," I said, looking at the control panel. "Once I open the outer door, the pressure differential will launch us into the void. The Triton's autopilot is programmed to retrieve our transponder signals, assuming it's still in one piece." Jax grunted, fashioning a crude splint for Lena's leg. "It will be," Anya said with a certainty that defied all logic. We sealed ourselves in the chamber. For a moment, we were suspended in absolute silence and darkness, the 5 last embers of humanity, huddled together in the heart of our own beautiful, terrible creation. Then I hit the release. The universe exploded in a silent, violent rush. We were fired from the spire like a shotgun blast of human shrapnel, tumbling end over end into the star-dusted blackness of open space. The sight that met our eyes was apocalyptic. It was sublime. The space around Neptune was no longer a quiet void. It was a canvas of incandescent destruction. The cleansing fleet and the purest armada had met, and their war was a symphony of annihilation. Sleek, purist cruisers were being torn apart by the sheer, brutal ferocity of the unchained dreadnoughts. Swarms of fighters, red and blue, spiraled around each other in a deadly, silent ballet. Explosions bloomed like terrible flowers, casting the rings of Neptune in a flickering, ghostly light. It was the most horrific and beautiful thing I had ever seen. The Triton, our ugly, stubborn little ship, appeared through the chaos, its external arms grabbing us one by one. As we scrambled inside and the airlock cycled, we were met by the sight of the battle raging on the main view screen. We had done it. We had turned the tide. We had saved Earth. But as I watched the two fleets systematically obliterate each other, a cold knot of something other than victory tightened in my stomach. "They'll never stop," Alara whispered, her face pale. "Even if one side wins, they'll just refuel, rearm, and come for us eventually. We haven't ended the threat. We've just postponed it." She was right. We had created a monster, and then we had created its twin. The galaxy would know no peace. Then Anya looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. It was the same question she'd asked after the echo. What now? Poet. I walked to the comm station, the one I had used to pilot our ghost through the system. My hands moved over the controls, not accessing the Triton systems, but reaching out one last time, back into the heart of the spire we had just fled, back to the poison pill I had planted. "The fake archive," I said, my voice quiet but clear. It wasn't just bait. It had a second purpose. On the main screen, a new icon appeared, originating from the command spire. It was a broadcast signal, but it wasn't the architect's language. It was ours. When either side finally fought their way to the control room and tried to access the core, I explained. It would trigger a secondary protocol, not a bomb, something worse. The broadcast spread with impossible speed, hijacking the command frequency of every ship in the battle. On the view screen, we saw the effect. The fighting faltered. The ships, for a moment, drifted. The message wasn't just data. It was the full, unedited echo, our symphony of human defiance. But this time, it had a new verse, spliced into the images of our history. Our art and our wars was live footage of the very battle they were currently fighting. Footage of glycons slaughtering glycons, of their ships burning in the cold dark of Neptune, of their civil war reaching its bloody, pointless crescendo. And over the images, my voice, the Remembrancer's voice, spoke a final, simple epitaph. "This is your harmony," the message said, going across 1,000 shattered bridges and burning command decks. "This is your rage. You have become your own masters, and you have become your own slaves. You fought for a lie. You are dying for an echo. Earth is no longer your prisoner. You are..." Then the final command in my virus executed. It wasn't a self-destruct for the ships, but for the prize. A cascade failure command went out to the entire Triton shipyard from the command spire outwards. Every system began to overload. Every fusion reactor went critical. Every automated dock tore itself from its moorings. The entire shipyard, the greatest single strategic asset in the outer system, began to self-destruct in a slow, silent, and utterly magnificent chain reaction. We had not only led them to the prize, we had made them watch as we burned it to the ground, ensuring neither side would ever be able to use it. We turned the Triton around and under the light of a man-made constellation of dying ships and a self-destructing city. We began the long journey home. The Glycon Civil War would rage for another generation. A self-consuming fire we had lit, but it would be a distant, guttering flame. The great threat had been neutralized, not by a grand fleet, but by a story. When we returned to the archive, we were not greeted as soldiers, but as ghosts returning from the grave. The celebration was quiet, filled more with tears of relief than shouts of victory. In the weeks that followed, humanity began to tentatively reach for the surface. The first probes we sent up showed a world untouched, watched over by the shattered, drifting remnants of the orbital stations the Glycons had fought over. We were, for the first time in 50 years, alone. My place was still in the data vault, but its purpose had changed. It was no longer a tomb for a dead culture, but the seed bank for a new one. Anya stood with me before the main holo projector, which now showed a live feed of the Earth's surface. The first sunrise our people had seen in half a century was breaking over the Pacific. It was chaotic, messy, and beautiful. "We won't make their mistakes," she said, her voice soft. "We won't forget the price of peace, or the value of a little chaos." I looked at the ghosts swirling around me, the poets, the scientists, the rebels. They were no longer screaming. They were singing. The silence of the deep was finally broken, replaced by the quiet, hopeful hum of a future being written. We were not the last of an old species, but the first of a new one. And carved into the new foundation of the first city we would build on the surface would be the only law we would ever need. The promise that was both our history and our future Earth remembers.